Thank you, Roland. Switching to a French accent to have a bit of variety. So it's super cool to see so many colleagues being so interested by engineering education that you devote several days to come here and to publish paper. I'm extremely happy of that, and I would like to thank all the team that has organized. My friend Gerhard said that was a perfect organization so far, so except the rain this morning, but that was for the Irish style. So again, a lot of acknowledgement to the team at EPFL that has been working very intensively to organize this thing. So just one thing about me, I'm the provost, the number 2 of EPFL in charge of education and research. That's not interesting. What is interesting is that I am from education. I'm an education researcher. So it's the first time, maybe the last time, that the School of Engineering and Technology and Science choose, it's a symbolic thing that school has picked as a provost, a researcher in education. That's something quite special. No, I'm not here to talk about me, but to introduce our keynote speaker, Margarita Boenig-Liptsin. She's professor for ethics, technology, and society at DGES, the Department of Humanities, Social, and Political Science at our sister school, ETH Zurich. She has been trained she has a Ph.D. in history of science from Harvard University and a Ph.D. in philosophy from Paris Sorbonne. Her research focuses on transformation and human identity, and on transformation to human identity and citizenship in relationship to information technologies across time and culture, and the implication of this change for ethical life in technological societies. From 2018 to 2021, she was the director of the Human Context and Ethics program at UC Berkeley and lecturer in the history department. Now, at Zurich, she is teaching about the relationship between technology, power, democracy, and ethics to students both from technical field and from humanities field. So please welcome with me Professor Margarita Boenig-Liptsin.
Thank you for your welcome, Roland and Pierre, and to all the organizers and broader community of the SEFI conference. It is my first time being among you, and it's really a pleasure to share with you some of my thoughts, which are evolving and sort of new and trying to pick up the themes that I feel this conference is living with and addressing, and hopefully to get to know you really deeply and share ideas together, for which I'm very glad that today's format of the keynote is not only me speaking, but really, after a little bit of me speaking, conversation with a lot of very different and really interesting people. All right, so I have heard that SEFI this year is one of the biggest conferences in SEFI's history, and I was wondering what that accounts for that. Now, organizers are doing a great job, we've heard. The strength of this community and the wish to exchange among it and to come back to SEFI is probably what brings a lot of people here. The beauty of Lausanne also, no doubt, but what else? It feels like there's something in the world for which educating responsible engineers is really a key. Something in the world for which professionals in engineering education are called to respond. So within the word responsibility, which is kind of on this main kind of defining subject of this year's theme, is the idea of response, to respond, to answer. On the one hand, to respond is simple, and yet the idea of an answer should be highly valued. As Danish novelist Karen Blixen once said when remarking on the concept of a response, quote, "An answer is a rarer thing than is generally imagined." A response also carries ethical content, to answer for what one says or does, to answer for the impression one makes, to be responsible. So I will respond is an injunction to answer life actively, and the foundation of the ethical notion of taking responsibility for one's answer. But to respond to what? On the surface of it, it seems clear, and I'm sure many conversations in this conference have already illuminated some of those elements to which this community needs to respond. Climate change, societal consequences of engineering in domains as wide as health, in city planning, in public transportation, in public infrastructure, media and communication, research and learning, labor and security, defense, and the list can go on and on. Everywhere, the agency and expertise of the engineer plays an essential role. But behind each issue that demands the response of the engineer is a fact that we appear to be facing urgent questions about the conditions of our knowledge in contemporary societies. To use a phrase from two scholars whose work I really admire, Matthew Fuller and A.L. Weissman, who study social and technical practices for collective sense-making, in this book called Investigative Aesthetics, which I can highly recommend, they say, quote, "A question posed to our societies is that of their adequacy of knowledge and of response." So we need to be responding to situations where foundational epistemic conditions, the ways in which our societies know, and the normative conditions, how we live together, are shifting and shifting together in tandem. And that those shifts are in part shaped by our technologies, by the processes we have set into motion, and in part reflected in them. So let's consider a few examples. So many popular concepts today designate this state of politics and knowledge. I'm sure you've heard of post-truth and misinformation, the rise of conspiracy theories. These terms are usually used to describe situations in which publics don't believe in facts or their value because they mistrust the experts or the institutions, both technical and political, that are delegated to produce those facts. They also describe situations where leaders undermine not only facts as such, but the institutional processes and capacities to produce legitimate knowledge in societies. There's a lot of disputed interpretation of what is real in this context, of what happened, how it happened, both by bad actors who knowingly spread false information or false accounts of events, but also through just structural context and consequences of our media communication systems. Furthermore, these conditions are abetted by digital tools and life in digital societies where such tools are ubiquitous. For instance, social media echo chambers contribute to polarization of populations on different issues. Generative AI tools allow easy fabrication of images, videos, and texts. Rapid dissemination makes it possible to reach with this content millions instantaneously, and at the same time, targeting allows personalization of content. We know all of these conditions, and we know their implicity and complicity with the products of engineering and the practices of engineering. But to really understand the situation of politics and knowledge in our contemporary societies, I think it's more helpful to look at how these conditions play out in the real world. And I want to share with you some examples that I'm actively thinking with in my own research. So consider, for example, the laborious work of documenting crimes against humanity in Ukraine following Russia's invasion. Here, the country and its citizens are actively trying to understand what happened, to document what is happening, and to use that very distributed sources of evidence, including digital evidence, to eventually bring justice, both in international courts as well as in communities. In the context of our contemporary knowledge societies, what kinds of claim can be enough when a war is referred to as a hybrid war? A war that is fought as much on the battlefield, that is the city, as it is fought in social media globally, through images, narratives, videos that blend eyewitness cell phone footage with choreographed videos of military strikes set to video game music. A digitized, mediatized context where the concept of theater of war takes on a new meaning and contributes to a vertiginous sense of loss of bearing of reality. That element, that felt element of this condition of knowledge and politics that I'm speaking of. In this context, the work of documentation and reconstruction of crimes against humanity seems at once futile, right? What does it mean to so fastidiously document, construct evidence when it seems so obvious in many cases what happened? And yet, it is an action towards justice, if not in some large sense of justice, then in a small sense of supporting the agency and community of survivors. Or look at a different example. Consider this case. Students in the UK protesting the use of algorithms to assign grades on the university entrance exam. In 2020, as I'm sure you know this case, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, the UK resorted to an algorithm to give student grades based on their previous performance and other data about their schools in lieu of having students sit for an exam. Now, this case, like so many others concerning algorithms and decision-making, drew a lot of attention and contestation from students, families, educators, political leaders, observers around the world for the way that the automation of the grade reflected and perpetuated structural inequalities in UK society. It's one of the many examples that have been discussed both in scientific articles and the public press of discriminatory outcomes that can occur from reliance on inappropriately biased data or algorithmic models. But what I'd like to observe with this picture is the way that one of the placards that the students are holding up, it says, "Your algorithm doesn't know me." It's telling about another dynamic beyond the concern with discriminatory outcomes. With the slogan, the students are saying that the issue is not only allocative, about what you get or you don't get, but also representational. It's about who can speak on behalf of who can claim to quote unquote know another person with digital tools, and in what context that knowledge can be used. So in situations like Ukraine or UK, decision makers actively turn to engineering experts for guidance on how to act. Right? How to crowdsource legitimate evidence that can withstand in the court of law, how to design better algorithms for decision-making processes. And engineers in this context serve as experts, not just in these cases, but across the board in climate change issues, energy transitions, pandemics, digital revolution. Yet their role has a specific challenge because while their knowledge is in growing demand, the credibility of engineering around the world is being challenged both from within and without the institutions that produce engineering knowledge, by publics, financial donors, politicians, student protesters, and scientist activists. Some of these voices call for inclusivity, reflexivity, and responsibility to better align knowledge and expertise produced in powerful institutions like universities with societal priorities and demands. Others defend specialization, professionalization, and instrumentalization as devices to ensure the neutrality, reliability, and authority of academic or engineering knowledge. Now, what I want to observe is that across the board of these issues, there is a question of justice that looms. Each example implicates engineering both in the problem and in the possible solution. In this aporia between knowledge and action, there is a felt sense of injustice. And the response of society and the response of engineering is to address that injustice. The different forms of response are unscripted, spontaneous, searching, and urgent, kind of like the conversations in this community over this conference. Now, scholars who study the politics of knowledge consistently draw attention to two elements of the contemporary condition of knowledge and politics. First, they point out that our situation, for all of its urgency, is not so new. It has some specific components in the present, but it actually goes back to modernity. And it is the product of modernity for having removed secure foundations for grounding value in religion and replacing it with reason, but where the reason is known as contingent, constructed, and cannot actively be used to ground values such as truth and justice. Similarly, scholars of science, technology, and democracy like Sheila Jasnoff and Hilton Simmet explain that, quote, debates about public facts have always been debates about social meanings, rooted in realities that are subjectively experienced as all-encompassing and complete, even when they are partial and contingent. So this is not a brand new problem, and yet it is a problem for us that we must struggle through. And struggle is a good word because in response to the problem, again, as theorists, political theorists today and theorists of technology and democracy today tell us, we shouldn't be hoping for some idealized conception of knowledge or truth that can be a solution to the problems of justice, to the problems of the aporia between knowledge and society. This instead needs to be dealt with within political struggle. Scientific knowledge and public facts are value-laden. Decisions about what worlds we want to live in and what actions to take to get there are political decisions through and through. And if we want to live in democratic societies, we should find a way to bring those questions into the realm of politics. How to organize our societies and our institutions in order to go through this struggle in the democratic way is the challenge we face today. Now, if this is the task before us, and yet we are reminded that we're not facing it for the first time, then maybe we can look to history. and specifically to not such recent history, to the end of the last century, where a form of engineering education was also involved in a response to a similar kind of situation. So today, I would say, has parallels to a moment when the relationship between knowledge and society was also undergoing a big shift in the so-called information society from the late 1960s through the 1980s, which was generally defined as a new age made possible by increasing use of computers, not just in science and government, but by publics, in the hands of individual people in ordinary life. Then as now, education was a site of response, and it loomed large to draw attention to the issues of bringing alignment between knowledge and society. By the 60s, computers were made visible early shimmerings of what it would mean to live calculable lives. For example, at Berkeley, during the free speech movement, when leftist students rose up and demanded the expansion of civil rights on campus, students protested against being treated as, quote, mere information to be processed by the metaphorical university machine. Students transformed the punch card, the symbol of the information machine's oppression, into a symbol of resistance by punching out the letters FSM for Free Speech Movement. And they carried signs that read, "I am a University of California student," in defiance of the inscription, "Do not fold, spindle, or mutilate," that used to be written on punch cards as injunctions to human users to treat the cards well so that they could be processed by the machines. This was the beginning of public grappling with the information society. And in the 1970s and 80s, in countries around the world, teaching the general public, and especially children, computer literacy became a way to adapt citizens for the envisioned life information societies. For leaders of these programs in the American, French, and Soviet Union, being computer literate meant much more than knowing how to program or use a processor. The computer, in its public and personal form, was an artifact reimagined to be integral to individual lives and identities, as integral as the traditional instruments of reading and writing. Now, ways of working and reasoning with computers took shape within broader societal contexts. Computer literacy wasn't only a lab experiment or research. They were part of national public education programs, kind of like we think about artificial intelligence today, and sites of geopolitical power struggles. It is essential to see the development of computer knowledge in the lay public as a project of national strategy to address a social opportunity and problem that widespread computing was seen to create. So public intellectuals, teachers, government officials in different countries viewed public computing as a means of addressing the socio-technical crisis that each country appeared to face in the proclaimed approach of the information society. As we look comparatively across the US, France, and Soviet Union computer literacy movements, we can see different operative imaginaries of what the information society would be like, how it would become about, and who should be responsible for helping to develop it better. With what ideas, what visions of rightness, as judged from the perspective of public computing advocates as well as publics. There were different ways of hybridizing humans and computers as a result of these projects, and these differences reflected perceptions of what was important for people to know in order to live well in the future information society. So, what does this account about the first computer literacy movement contribute to our question of today, which is about how to educate responsible engineers? On the surface of it, this doesn't seem very helpful because while we're talking about professional engineering education, that was public education. While we're talking about social skills, bringing social competencies into engineering education, that was actually bringing technical competencies into societies. Okay, but if we remember that what makes these moments parallel is the project of responding with education to produce more serviceable knowledge for society in changing technological contexts by integrating knowledge and capabilities of humans and machines, then we can pay attention. And what can we pay attention to? So I want to emphasize 3 components of the history that we could use to think about our present predicaments. First, the fact that public computer literacy started forming in the 1970s suggests that it's necessary to understand our present-day predicaments of learning to live in shifting contexts of knowledge and computing in a longer historical perspective. There is a lot of presentism focused on the newness of the latest technical capabilities, and we can forget to see the ways in which publics have been prepared to receive them. were not blank slates. There has been 50 years of cohabitation, at least in this specific area of engineering that is about computing. So new skills are layered onto pre-configured terrain that consists of experiences and habits with social media, with instantaneous mediated communication, with a penchant for certain ways of resolving uncertainty and preparing the ground for decision-making with data. We need to look at the integration and resonances across these different digital ways of being, not just at the latest technical capabilities on their own. Furthermore, in our own time, discussions about artificial intelligence or mass datafication and increasing workplace computerization frequently take the human-computer relation to be adversarial. Concerns center on the spread of automation that will make humans superfluous in the classroom, in the workplace, or even in the creative arts, where computers can do the job better than people. By contrast, computer literate person was envisioned by the pioneers of the computer age to have a, quote, feeling for the mechanism, a sensitivity to the powers of the machine that would enable the human operator to intuit what kind of tasks or problems could be better resolved with this new partner. Communication with the computer, by delegating appropriate functions to it, would lead to a deeper, more fully realized humanity in the user, unlocking both creativity and reason. So there was a way in which those programs were aimed at greater fulfillment of potential, both of the individual and of society. And this is important to take into consideration for what it means to take to have responsibility and to take responsibility not only of ourselves today, but with our machines. The second point that the history emphasizes for us is that whenever dealing with changes in foundations of basic knowledge, such as literacy, this is about collective, wider public undertakings. Leaders of computer literacy movements in the 20th century believed that the information society could only be reached when everyone had access to computing, once computing was public, used by public purposes, but also done by the public, reaching down to the level of each house, each person, as illustrated in this 1983 time cover. We see the public nature of generative AI on full display with the quote-unquote public release of ChatGPT in November 2022. But we should be concerned not just of how a few individuals or a few types of experts kind of shape this public moment, but how it is a public phenomenon and debate considered and worked out in our democratic institutions. Third and last component of the history that I'd like to draw attention to is the way that we saw when implementing computer literacy, national, political, and cultural context mattered for the ways of hybridizing humans and computers. Culturally and politically situated ways of thinking the human influenced the dimensions of subjectivity that computers were supposed to enhance. So there were questions that these pioneers were asking themselves about, are computer literate subjects, for example, psychologically distinct individuals? Are they members of a common culture with values that permeate how members think? Or are they contributors to a socio-technical collective? And each of these different formulations, different forms of hybridizing the human and machine, were resonant with specific cultures and politics in the country, in the communities in which they developed. Different fusions of human and computer grew out, but also reinforced different underlying ideas of who people are and how they should relate to one another in society that was on the brink of the information age. So this contemporary image from France illustrates with its inscription, Liberté, Égalité, Fatalité, echoing, of course, the French Republic's motto, Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, a French-inflected take on the broken promises of the sharing economy. And what's important for today is that we frequently talk about certain forms of engineering education to be applicable across the board to any community. And I think that's very important to recognize and know, but also to be attuned to the specific concepts of humans, to the specific environmental contexts in which the imagined rightness of humans coming together with machines are articulated. And maybe to therefore look for different vernaculars as opposed to one universal language of human-computer interaction or responsible engineering education. So if we take these lessons of habituated, public, and situated as injunctions for how computer literacy works in the world, we can come back full circle to the main interest of this conference, which is about responding with engineering education. So there is a lot of response going on. I think all of us are part of it in one way or another. Universities around the world are responding to changing demands of knowledge and society by creating new research and training programs at the intersection of technical, social sciences, and humanities disciplines. The aim of these diverse efforts is to build analytic frameworks that will enable scholars, policymakers, engineers, and publics to better understand the interactions among science, technology, and society, and to make powerful expert institutions like our own universities more accountable for their role in shaping social order. What is so powerful about these programs is the way that they integrate with and strengthen the response of other actors in our societies who are also responding to knowledge needs today. So we can think, for instance, how the engineering community's educators in the engineering community's response is related to, is resonant with, is different from responses of psychologists or responses of lawyers in this moment, or responses of politicians. So what is really important, think about the engineering education entry and response, and why it really needs to be amplified in any societal context, is because of the way that it can help to unsettle assumptions about where expertise and where responsibility lies for society, which is usually with the social sciences, or with the humanities, or with the law, or with the regulatory bodies. But in fact, the sites in which science and technology constitute society are diverse and multiple. And it is those sites among communities of scientists doing research in the lab, or engineers, in micro decisions of planners who integrate a smart technology into the neighborhood, in engineers in a technical company designing an update to a smartphone application. It is these micro sites where some of the greatest potential for flourishing as collectives in contemporary societies is. And how do we shape these normalized, micro, multi-sided, tacit processes through which the human technology future takes shape? How can these spaces be opened up to include more diverse voices of people who may not traditionally be allowed to shape the framing of the questions and the answers, or whose expertise may not be considered valid for the technical issue at hand? How do we allow these spaces to be places where new questions that people may raise be posed? One way is to put an ethicist in every scientific and technical team. And perhaps many of our students might be pleased at the job opportunities. But not only is this not sustainable, I think more significantly it's counterproductive in a way that this community probably already knows, because it would again displace the responsibility for caring for these questions to someone deemed an expert who is considered auxiliary to the quote-unquote main business of innovation. Another way, and the way that we can and are acting on as teachers in engineering contexts, is through critical thinking education about science, technology, and society for all of our students. Now, currently in universities around the world, this is an important discussion, right? And it's sometimes even framed around digital literacy, like what should digital literacy include? This is a screenshot of an event that took place in March 2023 at ETH, where a teaching event organized to address the question of AI in teaching and learning, during which an online event, 300 people from around campus came to this conversation online, which is a big turnout. This is not a new conversation, as we heard from, right? We've been having conversations about digital and literacies for some decades now, but it is absolutely taking on a new and important scale today. And it's also an opportunity, because you will see the difference. Thinking about artificial intelligence in teaching and learning is not really the same thing as thinking about those questions of justice that I was talking about earlier. And yet, this is an opportunity for doing that. When I was at UC Berkeley, we were teaching students digital literacy by the thousands to prepare them for life and citizenship in the 21st century. This is a fall 2018 Data 8 Fundamentals of Data Science course with over 1,500 students. This was not my class, but these were my students, because each data science major had to take a human context and ethics course, and this material was also integrated into their homeworks and assignments of courses like Data 8. Like we are discussing at SEFI this year, we aspired at Berkeley for that education to be empowering and to lead towards social betterment. For this to happen, digital literacy cannot mean making students into better prompt engineers so they can think in terms dictated by the new technology. Responsible digitization, responsible engineering more broadly, can only spring from a world in which tomorrow's scientists and engineers, as well as more broadly future citizens of any profession, are trained to think critically about the role of science and technology in the human condition, and to be encouraged to develop their ethical positionality. This is the only way forward toward a world in which human agency, creativity, and ingenuity can have a future, and where the current aporia between knowledge and society can be gradually worked on. Now, I conclude with this image, which is dear to me because it's an image of a student, made by a student, representing the work of students that we had been organizing at UC Berkeley, and representing it with a kind of metaphorical table to gather around. A table, you will see the double entendre, and a real table, a data table, and a table to sit around, to gather around. One of the lessons for myself, and I'm curious how it's been for you, of doing this work in the last few years of trying to build critical thinking about science and technology into engineering curricula, one of my realizations was that, it's not just about having people sit around a table, it's actually about building the table first. We're really at a point of designing and building them. And successful critical thinking education requires a building that is in partnership, right, between social scientists and colleagues in computing and data science, and faculty in domains that use and deploy data and computing tools, such as environmental science, bioengineering, urban planning, political science, sociology, in order to educate the next generation of responsible engineers. Just as important to include in the building of the table and in the seating is the question of who is around it, right? Not just university members, but members of broader society, publics, civil society organizations, corporations, with whom we scholars need symmetrical two-way partnerships to deliberate together about our common human technology future. Getting responsible engineering education right is not just also about what happens in the classroom. It also requires research, and usually this is research that springs from collaboration across very different forms of knowing, across generations, students and professors, across disciplines, statistics, data science, computer science, social science, in my case, probably different combinations of disciplines in some of your cases, and across community and publics. It also means working to engage in institutional transformation, something that Pierre and Gerhard and Emanuela can help us with, to amp up these conversations from the classroom, from the research labs, to the institution at multiple levels, right? So that they are part of scientific and technical practice in curricula and among disciplines in the university more broadly. So, after this kind of half-hour morning discussion of all the problems of knowledge in our contemporary societies, I wonder how you feel about that framing as the framing to which we are responding, including through this event. After thinking through, in a kind of very fast way, the histories of response through computing education that we can learn from our recent history, and that also have shaped the conditions for our own interventions today, right? Because that history has brought us to where we are now. We come back to Karen Blixen's simple injunction to value highly the response, the answer. And so I end by, again, pointing to the project of building the table, which is the first step, but also it seems to me the sustaining step and probably the last step, around which we can convene a conversation. And that's what we're doing at SEFI today through the days and really in the format of this very keynote panel, which will now kind of unfold as a conversation from now going forward. Thank you very much for your listening.